So it's the cross-functional prioritization AMA for August in the Americas time zones. And we had a call earlier today with Justin and I helped answer questions from folks, from team members in EMEA. We had a couple, which is great. And we don't have any questions yet in the agenda for the Americas one. So why don't we start there? Are there anything that people would like to discuss or any questions from the group? We had two good ones this morning from EMEA, just so happens. Sounds like more people are joining. No.
How about I'll kick us off with one and we'll give people some time to join.
Yeah, it might be worth
we don't have any more
about Sam's question this morning, Justin. It was a really good one, but go ahead, please.
Well, yeah, and if we don't have any more, we can end early. But I was going to ask you, Wayne, I think having gone through this, over the past several months, like what are you coming out of this, like fast forward a couple months, what are you most excited to see happen across R&D quads in terms of like improvements around collaboration or process or reviewing data, reporting? From your perspective, what are you excited about?
I'm excited for us to, a couple different things, to have data that's accurate and trended in ways that the quad, so PM, UX/design, quality and development can understand where they are and where they're going on things like, on many things like, oh, how much time are we spending on bugs versus features versus maintenance, but also how they're doing on overdue quality bugs or overdue security issues or overdue infrastructure issues, overdue UX and design issues, and compare that also to merge requests and the trends in merge requests to see so that the quad will be aligned both inside the group and also have transparency outside the group. So others who want to know what's going on or want to roll that data up at a higher level, at a section level or at a company level, can do so and then make good decisions based on that. So an example of, we've discussed like this team we haven't budgeted yet for a designer and we really need one. And those discussions have happened. We haven't budgeted yet for a quality counterpart and we really need one. In some of the reviews, I've seen discussions on that, or, hey, it looks like bugs past SLO are flattening out at, severity level 3 and below, while we're doing great on, certain sections, severity 1 and 2. Maybe we need to prioritize to do more bugs so we can get that not from flat to start going down again. And the more we do things like that, the better. I also want to see us get more efficient with all this. The first time is always hard. And we've done a first round and didn't complete it for everything, but most things. And, it was a lot of work. And it was a lot of sync work as well, is what it turned into. And I'm looking to see it get more efficient over time and also significantly more async over time.
Yeah.
What do you think, Justin, as you now taking over the facilitator of this group? I'll return that question to you.
Sure. Thanks, Wayne. And then we got a couple more questions in here that we should get to too. But I think, yeah, transparency and visibility into, it's sort of, I think of it like application observability, right? We don't have good observability, at least prior to this effort, on certain key metrics around efficiency and velocity of these quads. And so now we do. And so we're going to empower teams with data to make good decisions. And I think teams have been making good decisions with limited data, right, to this point, and now are going to provide them with better data and better insights. And then those leaders, whether it's PM, engineering, quality, UX, are going to be empowered with better data to make better decisions. So that's sort of the gist of what I'm most excited about. Dan Croft, do you want to vocalize your
thanks, Justin.
question?
I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is, we do have a sense from some teams that we have a lot of stuff to do, and that's no surprise to anyone. I think we always have a long list of great stuff we're trying to work on. So I feel like this process might actually help us get a better handle as well on where teams are at as far as sizing and whether we need to invest a little more in certain product capabilities and product engineering capabilities overall to satisfy the need. And I feel like the transparency and visibility you mentioned, Justin, sort of aligns with that. In ops, we've been doing a sort of an exercise. We're doing sustainability planning and looking at like what it will take to complete the sort of core work that we feel like maintains our system. And that's been pretty revealing and has yielded a couple of investment cases already, I believe. So that's been really helpful. So I sort of see this along the same lines as well. It can actually be really helpful in that regard. Go ahead, Justin.
Oh no, you picked up on something that David and I were actually just discussing recently, where yeah, we'll uncover, and we've already seen some of these cases where a team has spent a lot of time on maintenance work, and we believe as like a product leadership team that, hey, we're actually not quite mature enough in that category yet, or we think we could invest further, but it's a big surface area, there's a lot of maintenance work, maybe we're underinvested in that team and we should add team members to grow the capacity so we could spend more time on features, as an example. And so you're picking up on that, and that's great. And that's we'll hopefully uncover more of those cases over time.
Blair, you want to verbalize your question?
Sure. At least for me, and I would imagine other areas as well. The current process of getting clean data, which you talked about right away, is very manual, relying in my process heavily on applying labels, getting with people to apply the proper labels, all of that sort of stuff. In a perfect world, what does that go away? Does that get better? What's that look like for you? It doesn't seem like we could maintain that because a lot of my time is spent doing that.
Yeah, great question. So in a perfect world, I'm gonna answer that part of your question first. In a perfect world, this needs to be in the product. Like we need capabilities in the product to give us this type of reporting. And our customers jump through similar hoops that we're jumping through right now, where they're extracting data from their instance database and building like, BI reporting, which is effectively what we're doing on top of labels and so on. I don't know if labels are bad as a mechanism, like a metadata mechanism necessarily, but it should be automated, and we should have dashboards in the product that give product engineering leaders, et cetera, that visibility in the product itself without having to get outside of the product. Short term though, which that's on the roadmap, and that's something that teams are considering. Short term though, I do think like when you do something new like this, it's going to be painful manually at first, and you'll work out some of the kinks, but we should, two things. One, automate as much as possible, so we're not heavily reliant on people manually putting together reports and fixing tagging and all that stuff. And so whether that's, MR review bot or whatever, like helping automate label assignment and so on. Let's do that. And then instead of creating like separate motions to go review it, we're requiring people to do a bunch of manual work, embed this into existing processes, like we do the monthly PI reviews, or review performance indicators for each section, pull that into that process. And that way it doesn't feel you're already doing some work to put that together. And then it's a small extension of that instead of a net new thing entirely.
In my opinion, my thoughts are pretty consistent with Justin's. I think it gets better as we learn muscle memory to add labels when issues are created by the issue author generally, although we'll need to do it after the fact, especially for issues not created by team members, such as community contributors. It is quite a bit of work to update this for previously created issues, surely. So we've had a lot of cleanup work. We've only been going back a milestone or two, not to for some groups, hundreds or thousands of issues that are out there. Automated reminders will help with this, and that's something that Mech's team has already built some of, and I think is planning to build more of.
Yeah, I guess I'll just verbalize. I was just going to say, I wonder how much accuracy is necessary. Like I think when it comes to undefined and some of the critical aspects, we want as much as we can, but if we're spending like hours and hours and hours getting 99% and we could spend like 30 minutes getting 95%, I wonder if that's something we could give some guidance to people on, whether what we feel like is enough accuracy to make good decisions around all of this stuff.
Yeah, Dan, I think that's absolutely correct. One, anytime you're looking at data in time series, there's always a rate of error. That rate of error is usually fixed once you're dialed in, right? So the trend is valid, which is why you can do statistical techniques like difference and difference analysis, which they do in epidemiology and stuff like that. It doesn't require zero error rate. It just requires that it be roughly the same from time series to time series. And I've been through this at previous companies, and typically, like with the muscle memory that Wayne's talking about, if you spent more than 15 seconds thinking about what label to apply to one of these things in terms of type and subtype, it becomes way too long, right? So I hope the time being spent, Blair, that you're describing is more around where we're going back in time a little bit, or we're spending the time having tough conversations about, is this thing a bug or a feature? But that's like one-time calibration startup cost, not a forever cost. And then this goes away. And then eventually you're going to be in a position where like you've wanted a new designer on some area. We haven't been able to justify it for a while. And then data shows clearly we need a designer here, and boom, you get the headcount. Or I think we did a milestone review with Verified. It was clear like they're undersized. They need to be larger. That's a much better state than tolerating that undersized team for 2 years and just not having the visibility to address it. And so I think once we're able to close the loop on the benefits people see from having like the clean data, as you said, this is going to become one of the easiest automatic things we do, including literally automatic. Like Justin mentioned automation a couple of times. You have inputs and outputs, issues and MRs. You create an MR off an issue, just apply the same labels, and then boom, you probably have to do 20% of the work on MRs that you have to do in the upfront issue backlog. And there's plenty of other automation examples like that we can do.
That leads kind of right into my question. We have issues that have many MRs. Some of those MRs are bugs, some of them are features or adding new content. And then there's also the reverse, one MR that's also doing a bug and a feature. Should we be categorizing or labeling those different? Should it be like one for one?
Well, I think you just named the t-shirt that we're going to ship when we do this successfully. We got issues, right? That's the headline. Everybody's going to get a t-shirt in their side that says that. So yeah, these are the types. This is the muscle that we're going to have to build up, is the one-to-many sort of thing. It will like the shaping of work is to a large extent, something that managers do for other people. And we're going to find a lot of things that a lot of teams are doing well that other teams weren't. And now we can cross share that knowledge. Maybe we decide that over time, getting to more of a one-to-one, like if we're letting the output, the MRs, if we're letting that shape our issue backlog, then maybe we would expect things to get more one-to-one over time. We're paying more attention to that thing. Or we might decide it doesn't matter at all, and we just need to make sure we can accommodate it. Maybe this is an area where we're going to say, hey, differences between teams are a virtue. We don't need standardization here. We're going to let everybody do it differently. As long as the data is meeting a consistent interface, and Justin's the world and myself and David's can have our 40,000 foot view and understand what's going on across the org, then we don't need standardization, right? So I think as long as we're doing a good enough job teaching everybody the value that will come, or demonstrating the value that's going to come from these things, we're looking for guidance and opinions, and people escalating stuff like, hey, I've got an exception, I've got something that doesn't fit. Let's work through that, right? So I encourage you to bring exceptions to like the working group meeting. You don't have to attend every week or every day, whenever it happens. But yeah, feel free to raise those exceptions, and we can talk through those. In some cases, it'll be a learning experience of like, oh, that's how I should think about a feature. It's about new business value, regardless of the type of work it is, or it feels like in the past. And there'll be other cases where you've actually found a glitch in the system and we got to change the system. And both those things will sort of happen.
I was going to add two things. One thing Eric already covered while I was typing, so thanks, Eric. The other one was on this, it may also highlight areas where you could iterate more. So if you're seeing a situation where an issue spawns many MRs, then there might have been an opportunity to look back at that issue to see if there's a smaller iteration you could have started with, which would inherently have spawned a couple MRs or one MR. So something to consider there. And that's like another, I guess, byproduct of this effort is it will give you some data and visibility into that, the things you can consider.
Quick follow-up. So if issues spawned many MRs, probably should have broken the issue down to smaller iterations.
Maybe it's going to be nuanced per team. So I don't know specifically what you're working on, right? But that's a question I would ask myself if I was looking into it. If I saw this pattern where, oh my gosh, there's on average 4 MRs per issue, why is that? That's the first question I would ask one of my teams, like, hey, there's a chance that we're not breaking issues down far enough. And are we actually delivering the smallest possible iteration? And it might be the case where, I don't know, you might be touching multiple applications or something, and, it necessitates it, but it's worth asking the question and then digging in to figure out why.
What I've noticed, Lauren, just on my teams, the secure and growth, et cetera, teams, is that often features are broken up into at least 2 merge requests, a front end and a back end one, if they have front end and back end work. And bugs often, like not the average, but the median, bugs and maintenance are a 1-to-1 ratio. Often. And we also look, if an issue is taking a really long time, we ask, should we have broken it up into further, separate MRs, not necessarily separate issues, although that can help, but separate MRs, or earlier if the weight is really high. That's also not necessarily a problem, but a signal to say, consider breaking it up further if possible. And sometimes it's not easy to break it up further, but sometimes it just the question needs to be asked. Or if the question is asked, people find a way to break it up further so we can do it more iteratively, which makes all sorts of other things work out so well. Like it's easier to get it merged. It's easier to get it reviewed and merged, often the smaller it is. And it lets us get feedback earlier on it. So we never know if we're doing the exact right thing in the first iteration, right? So that the more we break it up and do it in smaller pieces, the more we can get feedback earlier. So that's just the philosophy for my teams. It doesn't always follow this way, right? But this is some of the questions we ask ourselves.
Yeah. And I was going to mention, like, I've had a similar pattern work reasonably well. We have large weights early on in the process where you're going through the weighting, and an indicator that something ought to have an investigation issue is when it's larger than a whatever weight. And that allows the team to sort of bubble up the fact that, okay, maybe this is a lot of work. Doesn't directly address your concern about multiple types of issue or MRs being within one issue. I think one of the other things we've discussed is the idea that if we have maintenance work coming directly out of a feature, and that's sort of combined into the issue of like, oh, we delivered the feature, but then there's some follow-up maintenance. Maybe we need to iterate on how we're like solution validation processes working within that team to just sort of say, well, is this a pattern we're always seeing where it's like, oh, we delivered the feature, but then there's this follow-up maintenance to the next milestone that comes in the issue or whatever it is. I mean, again, I'm not sure exactly the scenario you're talking about, but the patterns allow us to sort of do some evaluation of that, right?
Thank you. Really, really good info there.
So we've reached the end of the questions people wrote up. Give it another 10 seconds. And if there aren't any more, call it a day.
I do just want to highlight something that Wayne, you did, and Justin, you also did, and Dan maybe vocalized this a little bit as well. We talked about like looking at data and asking questions, which is different from looking at data and making assumptions or making decisions automatically off of data. And that's I think a really important difference I want to highlight here. But people shouldn't feel like this should be empowering. It should give people more visibility into what's going on. They'll be able to better manage what we can now measure. You're not going to be getting commandments from on high about what to do because some chart went in some direction. It's going to be like, oh, what's the hypothesis? Like, what is there an opportunity to improve here? And that's just something I want to highlight about the working group that doesn't necessarily get assumed or received.
Hey, Christy, I know you put your comment as read only, but I think it's actually a great one to read out.
Yeah, I was just really happy to hear Eric proactively bring this up because I think that it's a misconception that a lot of us have had. And so I think it's really positive to hear you state this, that it's about asking questions. And I think probably as a UX person, this especially appealed to me because this is what we do is we try to go in. It's interesting. We had a guest speaker thanks to Blair this week, who came to talk to us about design critiques. And the premise is very much the same as when you critique a design, you come in not to say this is what's wrong, you come in to ask questions about the why, and through the questioning of the why, you might come to a different conclusion. And sometimes you might not. Actually, sometimes your questions may lead you to, oh, this was exactly the right thing. So thank you, Eric, for clarifying that. That was great.
Nick, you mind verbalizing your comment? I think it's important too.
Sure. Yeah, I want to highlight that we never had this level of measurement and this level of coordination amongst all the product groups. So yeah, I think data is important, and the first time we're seeing it broadly.
Great. With that, thanks everybody. Have a great day.